Hello, BookTube. I confess this is a little bit of fugitive curiosity on my part. Those of you who don't make YouTube videos might not know that the backstage of the YouTube apparatus changed recently. Minor changes, some that look like they mean to streamline the process, others that are just fidgeting, just fiddling for no purpose. And I wanted to see if this would make a live stream easier, harder, or just the same. For those of you who maybe haven't been paying the closest of attention to the most tedious channel on BookTube, I've had a spotty history with live streams. A couple of them went really well and worked exactly as they were supposed to work, and then one went notoriously horrible. So totally wrong. I booted myself out of my own live stream, couldn't get back in, and also couldn't shut it off. I couldn't get it to stop. Uh, so I was a part of me was curious to see how this would work, to see uh, whether or not this backstage arrangement makes it, you know, any easier, and whether or not I would be able to see your comments, whether or not I would be able to, oh, I don't know, stop the stream if I wanted to, that sort of thing. I'm not 100% sure of. Let me see here. I'm not 100% sure of any of that anyway, but it doesn't matter in a way because I always remind myself that these live streams will become videos. They will be videos on the channel anyway. So even if they don't work as live streams, I can still talk for a little while. There's no harm in that, especially since we have something to talk about. We have booktube drama to talk about. It doesn't happen. I don't know if you've noticed, but booktube drama doesn't happen as much as it used to. I don't know if that's because things are quieting down. Fewer and fewer people looking to so to speak make their bones by making drama. I imagine that booktube drama still happens full steam ahead on the really huge channels, the 100 and 200,000 subscriber channels that exist in a weird echo chamber ecosystem of their own, uh, and thrive on drama. I'm sure that still exists, but I mean in this little corner of this 300 channels or so of honest, genuine people on BookTube, we've carved out this little community of, oh, I can see people in the chat. Oh, great. Okay. Uh, we already have someone throwing down. Jasper John Antonelli says that Peoria is the best town in Illinois. I beg to differ. Hast thou never heard of Carol Stream? But anyway, uh, in this little area of BookTube, we're perfectly happy to scrap with each other and disagree with each other and argue with each other and make fun of each other. But there's no real drama chasing. There's no real clout chasing that goes on here. I don't know why that is. I have a theory. I have a theory. I have a my theory is that the place where you're going to go to get drama is usually going to be the most outspoken or opinionated people. They ordinarily set themselves up as lightning rods for drama, by saying outrageous things, by saying things that don't fit with the Twitter consensus or whatnot. They're the ones that, whether you agree with them or not, whether you actually are outraged by what they say or not, and most clout chasers are not, they have absolutely no investment emotionally whatsoever in what's being said. But it's those people, those lightning rod figures, the ones who are more outspoken, more opinionated, maybe a little bit more outliers in the public opinion. They're the ones that will generate the clout chasers. They're the ones where somebody will come into this ecosystem and say, well, if I want a large following fairly quickly, that's the way to do it. Take on that person. And if I'm right about, I know that that's right in the rest of YouTube. That is how you do it in the rest of YouTube. But uh, I have a theory that the reason why that kind of drama, that kind of clout chasing doesn't happen in our little corner of BookTube is because all the people who are the lightning rods are not the kind of people you want to tangle with. They just aren't. They won't just take it and think, well, this is the price of fame. Instead, I mean, do you want to pick a fight with Britta? I ask you, do you want to pick a fight with Olive? I don't think you do. And even when it comes to somebody like me, I I very much like a fight, and I don't say anything off the top of my head that I can't defend. I have a feeling that's why that pernicious aspect of the rest of YouTube really doesn't cross the border into this part of of BookTube anymore. Nevertheless, there was a bit of drama, and I don't know if you caught it because it was also well mannered. It was also kindly and courteously done. The trouble started, as so much trouble tends to do, with Michael K. Nip, who made a video about Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel is a, a fairly dumb, late night talk show host, comedian, that sort of thing. He has the most wooden delivery of them all. He is the one who, in my opinion, rather the most noticeably does not understand the writing of his writing team. I have a feeling that he is probably the one of these figures who would be the drop dead dullest to know in person with no teleprompters around. Not the meanest. That would be somebody else. One of the others is clearly the meanest, and not the pettiest, but the dullest. I don't believe that he could crack a joke to save his life if he didn't have a writing team behind him. But he has this a worn and tired gimmick that he does on his show, where he goes out and does man on the street interviews, where he asks them some sort of question, uh, and trolls around for the what have we got here? Wait a minute. Oh, okay. See, I'm very leery about touching the chat because that's how I got bounced out of my own chat the last time. But YouTube, for some reason, wanted one of Jasper John Antonelli's comments to be held for review. We don't treat Jasper that way at all. He has a new BookTube channel, by the way. You might want to go and subscribe. But anyway, Jimmy Kimmel he's the guy that does this. He only has one hand gesture, and it's this. I swear, Johnny Carson must be rolling in his grave. But anyway, he goes out on the street and he asks people a question designed to make them look stupid. He picks the stupidest responses, clips them all together. He doesn't do it, of course. His team does. His flunkies do, and then presents a video designed to show you how irredeemably dumb America is. So he will go out and say, "You're in California. What's the capital of California?" And he will get people to say, "Is it Moscow? I think it might be New York." He'll get people to say that. One person in 50 will say that, something like that. All the other people will say the capital of California, and he will cut out all the ones and leave the dumb answers. I've never really understood it. I've never really seen the comic value in it at all. I mean, it's one thing if you're doing, you know, candid camera, for instance. None of you will be old enough to remember what candid camera was, but it's one thing if you're hiding a camera and just showing us people, how people react to something. Okay, those reactions are unrehearsed, and some of them aren't flattering to the reactor, but you're showing us all the reactions. Okay, that's one thing. That's fine. But why do something like this when it's so obvious that the host of the show would sound stupid if they were asked this kind of a random question on the sidewalk? Nevertheless, people must find it funny because Kimmel's not the only one who does it, and he does it regularly. And he went out and asked uh, people on the street uh, if they read. He asked them to name a book, uh, any book, or a book they've read in the last year, a recent book, anything. Name a book. And the results were just what you would expect. He talked to some of the dumbest people that he could encounter in the course of a day, and none of them could, or very few of them could. And he presented it as a segment that it was mostly meant for laughs, but the undertone was, see how stupid Americans are. That's the undertone of this gimmick just in general. And Michael Nip saw that, and he thought it was a lie, and he was right to think it's a lie. It's clearly manipulated uh, for effect. But then Michael Nip, he excoriated Jimmy Kimmel for lying about the reading public, and he championed the act of reading, the wonderful hobby that we all share of reading for pleasure. But then he took a step too far. At least it didn't seem so in his video, but there was someone who would find it that way. Because when Michael Nipp was casting around for possible villains if reading is not popular in America. When he was casting around for possible candidates, he came upon public schools and the fact that they dictate reading, they make it required. The books are usually abysmally chosen. The teachers usually are not familiar with the books. The method of teaching the books, here are 8 points, memorize these 8 points. It's Monday, you have to read 70 pages by Wednesday, that sort of thing, are designed or seem designed to, what's the horrible government word? Disincentivize? They seem designed to stigmatize reading in anybody's mind for the rest of their life. This is a point that I made on my channel many, many times. I guess this is my channel, isn't it? This is a point I made on this channel many, many times, which is that required reading has a strong chance of turning off potential readers right at the moment when they will either make it a big part of their lives or rule it out completely. I've known people where required reading is what did that. And the minute they left school, the minute they turned 18 and no one was forcing them to read anymore, they never read again. I know some of them have made points of pride out of it, saying, "No way, I'm not. What am I in school? I'm not going to read anything. No reading, no." Uh, Michael Nipp had ideas about how the public school required reading system could be improved, uh, and I found some of those interesting. I've had many of those ideas myself over the years, because I don't think the system is good the way it is. Regardless of whether or not it can be improved, regardless of whether or not we'd be much worse off if we dropped it, bad as it is, I don't really think it's good. So I was nodding the whole time, and I was thinking, well, all right, this is interesting stuff. Not sure that Jimmy Kimmel deserved the thumbnail, but this is interesting stuff. But I wasn't the only one to watch that video. It was immediately on the radar of Brian at Bookish. And those of you who don't know Brian's, you should all go and subscribe to Jasper's channel, Jasper John Antonelli. You should go and subscribe to Michael Nipp's channel, and then there's another channel, Brian at Bookish, which also you should subscribe to. And Brian was for a long time, 30 years, a teacher in public schools, and naturally he got his colors up when he heard public schools fingered for maybe one of the reasons why you would get people in a Jimmy Kimmel video like that who wouldn't have any idea about books, none whatsoever. Especially when you link it with a new Pew report, Pew survey, uh, that showed that roughly 20% of the people who answered the survey have not read a book in the last year, and by easy extension, probably have not read a book since they were made to read them in school. But at least not in the last year. A fairly high percentage, I would say. uh, uh, Naturally, Brian took issue with some of Michael K. Nipp's proclamations about public schools and how they teach reading. That's about it. Was all very well mannered. It was all very courteous. Michael urged, Brian urged his viewers to go and subscribe to Michael K. Nipp. That's how we do drama in this little corner of BookTube. It's not very dramatic, but but Brian raised a whole bunch of points in his rebuttal, I guess you could say. His rebuttal raised a whole bunch of points. One of which, a really, really good point, is that uh, public schools offer reading time to students, not prescribed reading, but just general reading time. Students don't often take advantage of it, or at least not to do any kind of reading that would do them any good, but it is offered. And as Brian points out, there isn't a public school teacher anywhere in the system that wouldn't be overjoyed at the sight of their kids wanting to read. Those kids would be encouraged. They would not be, the stereotype of them being discouraged because it's not the right kind of reading would never happen. I tend to agree with Brian about that. I tend to think that probably students are only encouraged to read in high school. Um, and Brian also pointed out that Pew survey, with the roughly 20% saying that they have not read a book at all in the last year, uh, he pointed out that is roughly the same figure as happened in a Pew report decades ago. That it seems like there's a rump bottom of responders to these surveys who just don't read at all. Like I said, they said in the last year, but it's easy to infer from that that they don't read at all. I mean, who takes a year off from reading if they read for pleasure, right? Nobody does. Uh, I Brian makes an excellent point in his response video that public schools tend to get blamed for a lot. They tend to be the whipping boys for anything that people think uh, is a present day ill. So if you've got 20 somethings who don't know the value of voting, for instance, or don't know how the government works, or don't know how to have any patience, or don't know how math or science, the STEM works, or that don't have a love of reading, that it must be public schools' fault. Brian is absolutely right to point out how incredibly unfair that is. That is obviously not the case. In public schools, you have lots and lots of people who are dedicated to instilling, if not the knowledge of those things, then certainly the desire for the knowledge of those things. I always waver just a little. I am a big fan, of course, of public school education, but I always waver just a little in a totally whole cloth defense of it, because on most campuses of American colleges, uh, the education college, the education degree, a degree that you would get in order to certify yourself to teach public schools, for instance, is the lowest required GPA. In Iowa, I believe it's a 2.0 GPA. Uh, if you have a 2.0 GPA, you cannot get a degree in engineering, for instance, or pre-med, or English literature, or history, or the classics. So if you're in college and you're sort of casting around and you're bouncing from one keg party to another, and you're suddenly realizing that if you don't get a degree, your parents are going to be furious with you, but you really suck at school and you really have poor grades, poor attendance, poor discipline, poor all of it. In many college situations, the only thing you're going to be able to do with the mess of your academic transcript is get a degree in education, because they only require a 2.0 grade point average. So you'll be able to do it. That is a fact in most college campuses, and if that's a fact, it's pretty easy to see the downstream effect of that, right? Which is somewhere down the line, the people who end up in public schools doing the teaching uh, won't. I'm trying not to be mean here, but it won't necessarily be the brightest bulbs in the chandelier. Which is why, for every dedicated, conscientious, and historically knowledgeable public school teacher like Brian, you have other public school teachers, one of whom told her class when they got in their history unit to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. She told her class, "Well, this assassination was incredibly historically important. This was the first U.S. president to be shot with a gun, as opposed to assassinated some other way, I guess." The students in her class just stared at her. They already knew that was wrong. They might not have known about anybody else, but they certainly knew about Lincoln. She said it just as a matter of course. And when I think a student objected and said, uh, uh, I don't think, Mrs. X, I don't think that's true. I think that all presidents have been assassinated with gunfire. She just blandly said, "Oh no, 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 no. President Kennedy was the first one, and that's what makes him so important, children." And eventually, word of that had to trickle back to the parents of some of the kids, and then word of that, all very courteously, had to trickle back to that teacher, that she was in fact wrong. And I am willing to believe that scenarios like that multiply like rabbits all over the country every day. I know that's probably more of a nightmare for Brian than it is even for me, but I don't think you can deny it. I think it's more likely to be true than false. For every high school teacher who is incredibly conscientious and checking their sources and hammering out their lesson plan, there are probably two who don't do that, or who think they are doing that when they have no idea. I mean, what have the last 5 years in American history taught us, if they haven't taught us that fully half the country thinks they're PhD level in every subject, when they're all, it's the Dunning-Kruger effect. They think they're that smart because they are so incredibly stupid on every subject. isn't it realistic to think that quite a few of those people have made themselves into the public school education system, and you're putting your children in their hands? I think it'd be unrealistic to think otherwise. Oh, but should I be looking at the chat? My private school, John Antonelli says my private school lit teacher has never even read a Jane Austen novel, yeah, and has read us The Alchemist. You know, at least public school teachers must have a degree in teaching and English if they teach English. True, true. They have to have a degree. Like I was saying, that degree it often isn't worth much. It's we're relying a lot on their good intentions. Let's see here. Jasper says again that horrible quote is sometimes true. Those who can do, those who can't don't. Well, the quote is actually worse than that, right? The quote is those who can do, those who can't teach. And that's where the quote comes from. Uh, uh, Mike Cruz says, I graduated from a social studies and education degree back in 2010. College of Education took the top X number of students, and one needed around 3.1 to get in. Oh my, okay, very good. Jesse says, when I was a teenager, I taught myself to read by reading comic books. It was the X-Men. I didn't think I would ever be able to read, but now I can read just about anything. Well, I don't know when you were a teenager, but many people can repeat that story that they learned how to read from comic books. And I would argue that's not just a function of the vocabulary and the variety of English in comic books. I would argue that it's also that when you're learning how to read English from reading comic books, you're learning with passion. And that means a lot. That means a lot. That's a huge aid to learning anything. Uh, uh, let's see here. Jeff Messerman says, those who can't teach Jim. Bottle Imp Book says, I remember being 16 and telling my teacher that I'd been reading William Golding's book. She was shocked that he'd written anything other than Lord of the Flies, which we studied together. Yeah. And I think you see what I mean. Stories like that proliferate. I have a bunch of them from my own personal experience. I'm sure everybody else does too. And Brian's response would be that maligns the tens of thousands of conscientious, dedicated public school teachers. And he's absolutely right. That response is absolutely right. Those stories don't prove anything. Uh, but uh, Brian also made the point that the alternative reading program proposed by Michael Knipp or a whole bunch of other people, that you don't assign reading to kids, but rather monitor the reading that they voluntarily do. Uh, Brian points out that that is unworkable. That's just totally unworkable. First of all, on practical grounds, you need a budget and to buy books in bulk. So it can't be an infinite number of books. And also, the only way that you can do that, the only way you can make that model work, is for the teacher to be familiar with the book. Uh, the ideal workaround here, the ideal workaround is one that won't work across the board, and that is for high school English teachers to say it's not just any book. I'm not going to assign you 8 books to read this semester. I'm not going to assign you that. But I'm also not going to say that you can read just any book. Instead, here's a spectrum of 50 titles. I'm going to put out suggest these 50 titles and describe them to you. And the 50 titles will be titles that the teacher already knows really well, knows well enough to cross-examine, to determine whether or not the student actually did the work, maybe even to examine the student on for a grade. That also has unworkable aspects to it, but the main unworkable aspect, I would think, is how many public school English teachers have those 50 books. How many? How many of them could do that? I I don't know that the number would be encouragingly high. I thought it was, in any case, I thought it was really interesting. There wasn't a back and forth. There was Michael K. Knipp made a video in which he partially blamed public school assigned reading for why people might not like to read. Looking not so much at Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel sort of exited stage left right away, and I was glad of that. But rather looking at that Pew survey that said that a little bit less than 20% don't read for pleasure, don't read at all, haven't read in the last year, and they haven't completed a book in the last year. I think Michael K. Knipp was mostly looking at that when he was casting around for possible suspects for why that would be. And one of the suspects was I would gather, I don't think he explicitly said it, but I would gather that one of the suspects was the bad taste that was left in his mouth by the reading experience that he was exposed to in high school, which for him would have been about 6 days ago. Oh wait, oh, I'm missing the chat here. Jeff Messerman says, as a librarian, I'm watching kids clamor for banned books right now. It's invigorating. Thus, the answer: ban everything. Nothing is fun when there's permission. That comes very close to my own suggestion. Uh, let's see here. Trish Bovell says, I was furious that my high school daughter's class was assigned to read Stephen Covey's The Seven Habits of Highly Effective Teenagers. I guarantee you one of the reasons they were assigned that is because it was, in fact, a book the teacher knew. I think probably the heart was in the right place. It's just the book is awful. That's all. Uh, Jasper is back. He says going into teaching is already something the lowest common denominator, and then teaching English is even lower. Takes the least amount of skill. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Well, you are. You are being too harsh, but that's why we love you. uh, ain't finna read that. Says I feel like there would be a lot of teachers judging students based on what they read. Yeah, yeah, the human element enters into this entirely. And what Jeff Messerman said about kids wanting to read banned books is something that I have always noticed. I have never been a public school teacher, thank God Almighty. But something I have always noticed in dealing with young people is that the surest way to get them to genuinely want to read is to give them the impression that this is something great that they're not currently doing, that it's something great that they could do and that other people maybe disparage, but that they're not doing. They could start tomorrow, but I'm not going to make you. You can go to school all you like. That's just fine. You do whatever school tells you to do. I have seen many, many times where the house is full of books and the kids are free to ignore them until from their room they hear adults talking animatedly and laughing and arguing and sloshing the wine about books. And then all of a sudden they start to think, this is something I want to try. I want to try it on my own, not because someone's telling me that it'll make a better citizen out of me, but because I'm seeing that this is real. This is actually real. This is enjoyable. I've seen that happen. That to me uh, has worked better than any more formal approach to make kids think, I want to try this. And if I'm right about that, and if psychologically that is the way that really tends to work, well, then you can see right away why high school assigned reading would be failing, because it's the exact opposite of that. In high school assigned reading, it doesn't take the brightest kid in the class to tell that often the teacher does not know the book. Well, then that is the definition of a pointless exercise. Of course, kids are going to rebel against that, especially when nowadays, as opposed to decades and decades earlier, they have the whole world of distraction right there in their hands the whole time. It's not like in eons past when there was the video game arcade or anything like that. These kids they can watch bungee jumpers in Bali at any minute of the day or night. They don't need to get home and then have the television held hostage for when they do their homework, as happened in the good old days, where that was it. The television, that one device, there was only one in the whole house, and in order to get access to the very limited palette of wonders in that device, you had to do X, Y, and Z first. Instead, they have all that with them. They have that with them at all times. Might seem like an insuperable obstacle to reading. But I'm ignoring the chat again. Uh, Budget wise, and I suspect this is the future, wouldn't want an e-reader with preloaded books provided a good option for your suggestion of 50 books. Well, yeah, that's a higher tech. That's Banberg 13 who says that. That maybe an approach here would be provide the kids with an e-reader that has an array of choices but is locked and limited. And an e-reader can also track whether or not they're actually doing the reading. Except that you see right away the weak spot of a plan like that, which is that these kids are all digital natives. I know I just got a book the other day that said there's no such thing as a digital native. I know that's not true. So half the class would be hacking that device in no time at all, or selling it, or whatever. But here, I don't want to. Jeff Messerman says, spot on, Steve. I say level it up, lock up copies of Fanny Hill, and accidentally leave the key on the counter. Suddenly reading is badass. Well, it's not a particular book, though. What I'm talking about is an activity. Like what I'm talking about is an interpersonal activity. Take for instance, just as an example, the nights up in the old house in Vermont when Frida and I go up to Vermont. There's all sorts of talk about all sorts of things all during the day and all during the evening and all during the dinner hour and whatnot. But eventually, it starts settling down to me and Mark talking into the night about books, and it's animated, fun talk, detailed, fun, personal talk. It's clear to anyone listening that reading is really, really active, an active thing between these two people. Anybody listening to those conversations, any teenager listening to those conversations, eavesdropping on those conversations, one of the things they're going to feel is, I want to do that. What they're doing, I want to do. This does not seem at all like the impression of reading that I get when I'm in school. It's the same activity, but this doesn't seem like that at all. This is something I want to do. It would be nice if were a way to inculcate that feeling in kids in school, in the classroom. And I imagine plenty of teachers do that. Oh, wait a minute. Jasper says reading in school becomes fundamentally different than reading for fun. People are constantly talking about themes, critical perspective, the most boring and pretentious way to read. Yes, yes, and I suspect that part of the reason why books are talked about in that way is because it gives the English teacher a way to talk about the book at all. I guarantee you, if I were a guest speaker in a high school class, I would not talk about any of those things, and there wouldn't be. You could hear a pin drop. There wouldn't be anybody saying, "Oh, this is just boring." It could be that some of these teachers just aren't cut out for the job. I imagine that's true in private schools too, but there's more vetting, I think, going on there. Uh, let's see here. Geo Craftsman says the free reading model made me a reader. You had to write about it every week and include a quote from it and report on the exact page number you read every day. It could definitely be cheated, though. Yeah, it could be cheated, but I like that description a lot. Free reading like that, systematic free reading, where it's not just read whatever you like and tell me if you liked it, but there's all sorts of granular accountability. I like that model a lot. I think with a few uh, tweaks to make it a little bit firmer, the cheating would be cut to a minimum. It would be pretty obvious if you read something or not. I still don't know that it would inflame an enthusiasm to read, but that gets to a point that I'm actually coming to. Sean and McKelly says, I loved to read in elementary and high school, but most of the required reading I hated. Books I had to read and write essays on were books with characters I couldn't relate to or appreciate. Okay. All right. Well, you already know if you watch my channel that I disagree with the idea that we go to books for people that we can relate to or appreciate. I would argue that having to write essays on books like that probably made you a better reader. Oh wait, oh, the chat is going on. Bottle Imp Book says I can make minor complaints, but it was my English lit teachers who fired my interest in books. Oh, that's wonderful to hear. I would still be happily read the things from high school syllabus. Jasper says I started reading after finding a copy of Harold Bloom's How to Read and Why and thinking him the most pretentious person in the world. Pretty close. Adorable, but pretty close. And when confronted with that fact over wine and calzones, the floppy response would be, well, I know I don't seem to be able to do anything about it, though. How does one do anything about it? Jeff Messerman says, I'm watching graphic novels explode right now at my library. For many, they're becoming a gateway drug to the wider array of reading. So, optimism. Optimism for what, though? Books or movies and video games? Chi Ann Nicole says, I was never turned off from reading the assigned books. It was always breakdowns and interpretation assignments that made me dread the class. Yeah, the systemization of it. Here's the book, but I'm not really interested in what you individually made of it. Instead, here are your preset themes. Here's what you can write. Here's what I want to see. I'm not really interested in your interpretation of it. That can be deadly, and it can be deadly pretty quick. Oscar Mendoza says, I considered myself a heavy reader, but from middle school through high school, I hated reading and would look down upon books and English class. After high school, I picked up a book and never stopped. Wow. Well, you're a rarity, I would say. I would say that most people who are driven away from reading in high school don't go back to it. And that is a point that I want to get to, but I'm trying. I'm trying to stay on top of the chat, not touching it, mind you. There's one button here that I will touch. There's a big red button that says end stream, and it hasn't gone away, so I assume all is well. Books, songs, and other magic says, as a teacher, I have many friends who are English teachers, and they are passionate about reading their favorite books, but they have their favorites, and they're great at enthusing about reading. That's fantastic. I don't think they're the norm, but maybe I'm wrong about that. I know a lot of public school arenas in 4 different states, and most of them, I hate to say, are gray, slope-shouldered, absolutely beaten gulags when it comes to the joy of reading. They perk up a little in subjects that are more easily quantifiable, but when it comes to literature, to interpretation of what you're reading, which is an entirely interior thing, right? That's when the life tends to go right out of them. I'm glad it's not universal. It's great to hear. Uh, Trish Bovell says, I picked up M by Antonio Scarati at my library today. So excited to get into it. Oh my. Oh my. I can't wait to hear what you say. I can't wait to hear your reaction. Of course, I'm putting my money, my chips on the line here, as I do all the time. Those of you who watch my BookTube channel regularly will know nothing means more to me than my book recommendations. I don't toss them off. I'm not sponsored to make them. I don't lie about them. They mean a lot. They mean a lot to me. On a professional level, I wouldn't have the readership that I do if I weren't mostly right. If I was constantly making dumb recommendations, no one would read my stuff. No one would go out of the way to find someplace where I write and subscribe to it just so they don't miss it. But B is much more personal. I want everybody to have that kind of hair standing up reading experience. I am convinced that M, Son of the Century, will do it, even though it is a translation of a long Italian novel about the impressionable young manhood of Benito Mussolini. It sounds on paper like it's the last thing on earth that would do that, but I'm confident. I'm confident that it will. Uh, Perfect Hand Productions says reading needs to be promoted in the home. It obviously needs to be taught in school, but if reading isn't valued in the home, the children are much less likely to grow into avid readers. That's kind of what I was alluding to a little bit earlier. That if kids can see that this is an actual thing as opposed to a subject, they're far more likely to want to do it on their own. Uh, let's see here. I ain't finna read that. Says sounds like the main issue with lit education is Scranton testing knowledge of facts instead of seeking proof of personal experience with the work. Well, yes, I don't know. It's a problem, yes, but I don't know that has a solution because how do you test for personal experience? I mean, Brian's point in his response video was basically boiled down to there are only so many hours in the day. Public school teachers are only human. There's only so much they can do. Uh, Book, songs, and other magic says often I have found teachers can bring people into the writing styles of the classics when they can be difficult. Popular fiction aren't studied in schools to the same degree. Yeah, I don't get that. I mean, in Brian's response video, he mentioned one other consideration, especially when choosing books for bulk purchase, which is what if the book is vulnerable to cancellation? What if it becomes controversial down the line and is pulled by the school board? Well, then you've wasted all that money on books that you can't use. And he didn't quite stress this as much, but that tends to produce middle of the road anodyne choices, and that tends to rule out a lot of popular contemporary fiction. Look at a lot of how easily it would be to get a school board up in arms about a lot of popular fiction, even the least offensive kinds, which leaves the same old bricks in the public school curriculum, the same old bricks that just, I mean, All Quiet on the Western Front in a creaky 60-year-old translation, taught over and over and over and over and over again. Uh, but anyway, let's see here. Uh, Jeff Messerman says, I fear parents today discourage reading because how will you earn a decent living reading, Junior? I hear veiled versions of this regularly. Seeing their kids stationary, staring, grinds their gears. Bad parenting, imperceptive parenting. Oh my, that's a lot more intractable a problem than renovating ways to teach reading in high school. Uh, let's see here. Shauna McKelly responds to Perfect Hand Productions. I agree that reading valued in the home makes avid readers. I learned to read when I was 4, and read with my dad every night. When I got older, I learned to read broadly. Boy, I envy that. All these people, all the people in on booktube channels and in comments fields saying that they learned to read when they were just little kids and loved it from being a little kid. I envy that so much. Uh, let's see here. Jeff Messerman says, which of course means kids should crave reading more. Who wants to do what mom and dad say? I would argue the point I'm trying to make about kids overhearing passionate reading conversations and wanting to read because of them. I would argue that kids the biggest open secret of being a kid, of being, let's say, a high schooler, is how badly they do want to be mom and dad. It's how badly they do want to be adult. I think it's the rose-colored nostalgia of a lot of older and creaky adults uh, to say that kids of high school age mainly want the innocence of childhood, when really it's the adult who wants the innocence of childhood. The kids in high school want to be adults. They want to know what makes adults tick. They yearn for it, and that's why they can get so disillusioned when they encounter the humdrum reality of it. Suddenly, it's not anything to be aspired to. I would argue that it's not so much that they shy away from it because their parents tell them to do it. It's probably connected to Jeff's earlier point that they shy away from it because they don't see that enthusiasm for it in their parents. If they did, I think that would make a lot of difference. I think that would make a lot. How many of you have seen that in your own kids or in kids of friends of yours? Kids are sponges. They never miss anything. They're watching all the time for what's real. They want what's real, and what's real for them is what's adult. If they were around adults who passionately love to read, I think a lot of them would. I don't know, though. I've never had kids that Deb and I kept, so I don't know how they grow up. Uh, Jasper says, when I was young, my dad read a lot but never spoke about it, so I still have barely any idea what he reads or likes. My father was the same way. Uh, if your father is still alive, you could change that today. You could find out what he likes to read. And if it's uncomfortable at first, then tough. Just get through the uncomfortable part until you're talking. I went through that with my father, and I watched him read all the time. I remember vividly what it felt like to think, well, maybe this is something real. If this stern and serious guy sets aside time every night to do this thing, maybe it really is something that I should do. And I had plans. I planned, once I got up my courage, I planned, all right, well, we're going to take a long train trip. Instead, intentionally, instead of taking a plane trip, I'm going to insist on it. And during that that train trip, I'm going to talk to him about reading. I'm going to start with reading. I'm going to start with the books that are on the stand next to his seat in the living room, but I'm going to branch out from there, and that'll be what we'll do. And a week before those train reservations came due, he had a massive aneurysm, collapsed to the floor, and never woke up. So if if your comment, I still barely have any idea what he reads or likes, includes the fact that he's alive and you could ask him, I strongly urge you to do that. Instead of living with a lifetime of not, I strongly urge you to do that. But Ain't Finna Read That says, I figured you were reading as a zygote. When did you get into reading? I was not reading as a zygote. I envy the rest of you, the ones of you who were. I came to it very late from one great teacher who did exactly what I'm describing. He did not tell me how great reading was. He did not shove books at me and lecture me. Instead, I saw that it was his entire life. And I saw the light that it brought into his entire life. It wasn't just that I saw him doing this thing, it was that I saw that it made him come alive. It was his livelihood, but I didn't pay as much attention to that as I paid to how much it changed him to do. It was purely the process that I'm describing. Well, I wasn't a little kid when it happened to me, but I know the process is real because that's the way it happened with me. I saw something I then learned that I wanted. Uh, but anyway, Jasper says, if I'm going off by books he has gifted me, Voyager by Sterling Hayden and Mein Kampf, I still have no idea why. Shauna McKelly says, Jeff Messerman responds to Jeff Messerman. The reason I read so much was in part because I wanted to be like my father. Whenever I wanted to read a book, my parents would let me read it, but they would read it with me. Oh, that sounds great. The closest I ever come to that, like I said, don't have kids of my own. don't have kids of my own. The rest of you are the closest that I come. I have a thing that I love to do when I'm hanging out with parents and their kids. I love to go to a bookstore with everybody. But when we do, it's been my experience, it's been my pattern for decades and decades to take the parent aside and say, what I'd really like to do is pay for what the kids want. Totally on me, my treat, anything they want. Uh, as long as I get the pleasure of listening to them talk about it on the ride home, then anything on me. Uh, but reading it with you, what a great experience that must have been. Michael K. Vaughan is here. Good Lord. I was lucky that not only did my mother and stepfather read, but they let me steal their books. So you're bad seed, is what you're saying. You're saying a nefarious aspect runs in the family. I'm not sure. I admire the courage of admitting that to the chat. But they already knew there was something wrong with you. Max Mestedich says, in my adolescence, I think I was dissuaded from reading for so long as I only associated it with those entirely replaced their social lives and extracurricular with it. Seemed almost cowardly. Exactly how you feel. That's exactly how I felt. That's exactly how I felt. Until I realized, very belatedly, that it's the bravest thing you can do. What comparison can there possibly be to being a little drunk in a bar in South America and deciding that you're not afraid of the biggest guy in the room and that you're okay with provoking a physical confrontation with him? That the bravery of that, first of all, there's very little bravery involved in that, and second, what in that compares to what we all do on a regular basis when we open a new book? You're laying open your entire being. You're laying open your entire being to having the furniture rearranged. That's as brave as it gets. But I did once think that way. Oh, I've lost control of the chat. Well, we'll pick up. I'm not going to touch the chat because then I'll boot myself out. Book Songs and Other Magic says, it warmed my heart when my daughter told me on Sunday that her watching my YouTube channel reminded her of when I read to her when she was little. Aw, that's sweet. Just be sure to tell her, pat her on the head, squat down to her level, pat her on the head, and be sure to tell her that although that's fine, her favorite booktube channel has to be me. Jesse says, I love falling into a good book when on a work school break. I think imagination is so important. Stories inspired me to write my own. Right. But the point I'm trying to make is that falling into that book is not a passive thing. It's not only active, but incredibly dangerous. You can change who you are. Being in a bar fight will never do that. I now understand how wrong I was to view it the way it was characterized here and the way I characterized it myself, which is this cowardly retreat from life. Oh no, not at all. Uh, let's see here. Makeup with Glitter says, I am so sorry about your dad, Steve. My mother was always read to me as a child, and it always stuck with me. It skipped a generation though because my brother hates reading. Now, this is a thing that I often tell people. There's a thing you want to avoid, and that is the regrets that are going to hound you for the rest of your life. It's not just a question of taking up tobacco or getting your body tattooed. It's also not doing things because you're waiting for some artificial time. And that still bothers me. After all this time, that's been a long, long time, and it still bothers me. If I was ready to have a long chat and get to know this guy who'd met so many US presidents, who'd covered so many events, the only kid of his who grew up to be a professional writer, if I was willing to, if I already knew that I was going to have the courage to do that, I should have done it right away. I should have done it as soon as I decided. Awkward at first, sure. Who cares? anyway, let's see here. Books, songs, and other magic says she's 29. In response, okay, so you're not going to squat down and pat her on the head. You can pat her on the head if you want. You're still her dad. but okay, so she's 29, so you won't squat down and look her in the eye. It still doesn't change the fact that her number one priority, not just on YouTube, but in life, is to become a Donna Huguenot. Mary Bookcliff says, I only just realized that my real reading life started when I met someone named Steve. You're not talking about me, are you? Oh, well, that would be incredible if that were true. Geo Craftsman says, my mother used to read Frog and Toad to me, but replaced the name Toad and Frog with me and my older, much taller brother, respectively. Well, I didn't expect this because, as I said an hour ago, I actually do have one more point to make. I just haven't got to it because I'm getting all these great stories about how people learn to read from their parents. Shauna McKelly says many of the experiences were good, but I remember talking to my father about Catcher in the Rye and how irritating Holden Caulfield was. I also had a lot of questions about the profanity in it. Yeah, yeah. I mentioned 60-year-old creaky, poor translations of a weird and totally off-putting book for teenagers, like All Quiet on the Western Front. Even more so, Catcher in the Rye. How on earth did that become a high school staple? It's one of the most adult books I've ever read. It is going to soar over the heads of most of the young people who read it the first time. Absolutely. So, if you haven't read it, if you're the age of 30 and you haven't read The Catcher in the Rye since you were in school, read it again. You'll be blown away. I think probably the reason is because the protagonist is high school age, but that's just ridiculous. Uh, but anyway, wait a minute. Or uh, Ma- Mary M's book pod. Growing up, I remember my dad reading Sidney Sheldon's books. I haven't thought about this in so long. Thank you for bringing up fond memories of him. Okay, but did he read them to you? Well, that would be the coolest dad in the world if you read Sidney Sheldon to you. Uh, Jasper Antonelli says, my serious reading started with finding Harold Bloom and then Steve. Imagine how you'd feel if you'd met us together. Oh, but I know that. I know it's terrible, but how does one not be pretentious? How does one do that? I ain't finna read that. So teenagers often think Holden's a genius. I think that's a testament to Salinger's skill. Yeah, yeah. I fought it for the longest time, but that is a very skillful book, and not in the ways it first appears. It is intensely subversive. I we should do a read along of it. Leo Percara says, my mom was born in 1956. Oh, okay. I can power through this. She always hated reading, so the educational system, at least here in Argentina, must have been terrible for a long time. Yes, and I want to talk now and think about the educational system in non-US countries, but all I can think about is that your mother was born in 1956. Okay. All right. Well, it's shocking, but I'm still a really sexy 28-year-old, and that's the thing to concentrate on here. uh, uh, oh, okay. Mary M's book pod says he didn't read Sidney Sheldon too. He read Sidney Sheldon, but he didn't read it to her. So he doesn't get Progressive Dad of the Century award, but still, at least. So the point is, you saw that he was reading things and loving it. That must have helped in making a reader out of you. It must have. Jeff Messerman says, I'm totally reading Sheldon's Master of the Game to my kids at bedtime. uh, let's see here. Jasper Antonelli says, my mom was born in 1964. Okay. Okay. Gotta open the window here. Get some fresh air. Have some tequila. Oh my God. Baby bean. Okay. Your mother was born in 1964. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Books, songs, and other magic says storytelling is everywhere. To be fair, a lot of the music that is in current teenage culture is full of performers relating their own stories. Hip hop's being so popular is part of that. Off topic? Well, it is off topic. And I mean, it's interesting, but I don't think you people are able not to be interesting. But it is off topic because we're talking about reading. And this bumps against another iconoclastic opinion of mine on BookTube when I draw a distinction between reading and listening to audiobooks. I think there's an inherent distinction there. Reading is entirely internal, and so it's not the same thing as listening to the autofiction elements of current music. Uh, okay, no, people don't start listing the years. Don't start listing the years when your parents were born. This is going to get so incredibly depressing. Jesse says, you and Richardson Reed's nautical discussions encouraged me to read Moby Dick. Now rereading the book. Yeah, it is wonderful. I've heard from so many people uh, how much they enjoy the book chats that Mark and I actually film. The book chats that we actually film are a tiny fraction of the book chats that we have when we're out on the road in his big red truck, or when we're in the living room and the whole house has gone quiet. The bean is sound asleep next to me, like she is now. We're talking about all kinds of things, and there's you get to know somebody well enough that the touchiness, the sort of wariness goes away. So now Mark and I are completely comfortable with the fact that we know that we like some authors completely differently. There's no attempt at tearing down or converting or anything. It's just, and that helps a lot. That helps a lot. I mentioned on my channel before that thanks to him, the next time I encounter, maybe some publisher brings out a new translation of Hermann Hesse or more Kazantzakis, Zorba the Greek, I'm dive into it right away, and I'm going to dive into it with a lot more energy than I otherwise would have because of those conversations. Oh, please, people. Uh, uh, okay, 1985. Oh my God. Oh, Trish Bovell. Trish Bovell's mother was born in 1932. Bless her. Bless her. Let's see here. I don't want to miss anything. Hi, Jaya. Oh no, that's gone. Let's see here. Maximus Stedish, Orwell, 1984, was peddled to me my sophomore year. Surely there exists. Oh no, you were cut off. Jasper says, I recently read Moby Dick. I watched your read along of it from 2018. Really tempted. I don't know BookTube's protocol for doing reread alongs. Rereading is such a part of my life. I have no idea how to do that, or whether or not BookTube even allows it. Do the rules allow it? Like, for instance, Michael K. Vaughan has an event coming up, June on the Range. I'm looking forward to it. One of the things I'd like to do, I mean, the comment section, when he made his announcement video, his comment section filled up, and there were a large number of people who intend to read Lonesome Dove in June, for June on the Range. I automatically thought, boy, I would love to do a read along of that, but I've done it already. Am I allowed to do it again? I want to do a read along with Matthew at Mayberry Book Club for June on the Range. Uh, let's see here. I ain't finna read that says hip hop as storytelling runs into the same problem as Catcher in the Rye. If you don't understand the first person experience of the world, you can fall in love with it and desire to be there too. Uh, Fedista says Fairy Queen sat on my shelf for 25 years. It was only BookTube inspiration that motivated me to finally read it. Now anything is possible. Leo Picardo says, hey, Steve, what do you think of this new thing called millennial prose? I heard some writers, usually in their 30s and 40s, talk about it, but I've never read any. Count yourself lucky. Millennial prose and all of its subcategories, including ADHD prose. And all of it couched in, you can see this coming a mile away, but I promise I won't rant. I promise I'm not going to fill the live stream with ranting. But all of this crapola is couched in what you can see coming a mile away, Twitter style, alt left and alt right identitarian politics, where a thing exists solely to crush opposition to that thing. So I don't care about this. I don't read. I don't read my own writing. I don't care what you read. I'm only doing this to dare you to object to it, because I want to crush you on identitarian terms. I feel a rant coming on. So let's see here. Book Songs and Other Magic says, oh, no, he's responding to Ain't Finna Read That. Bookends and Books says, my mom was born in 1939 in a culture where reading was mostly frowned upon. It was a waste of time and potential sin. Culture changed radically in the 1960s, and she raised two bookworms. Wow, that's wonderful. Oh, Michael K. Vaughan is back. You are allowed to rereading anything. You are the great talent. Well, you keep saying that, but I have to keep in mind, above a certain atmospheric ratio in the ecosystem of BookTube, I am universally hated. Even now, 6 years after my initial offense, above that, a certain atmospheric. Once you get into the 100,000 subscriber range and higher, I am universally hated. not a single exception, just universally hated. So I don't think that the great Donahue can do anything. But I am curious about the BookTube etiquette of doing a read along, where I've done a read along already and I maybe feel like doing another one, or I maybe feel like going over it again. I would look over my older videos and try not to make the same points all over again. For instance, with Lonesome Dove, there are a whole bunch of things that I didn't cover, that I didn't touch on, that I didn't read out loud, that I could do in a new read along. Maybe Matthew and I will do that. Uh, I start a trend with a reread along. Well, we'll talk on BookTube about how much we reread and how much we enjoy it, but I don't know that I've ever seen a reread along. I don't know that that's why I don't know if it's allowed. Uh, Jasper says, my mom just walked by and told me to thank you for mentioning the Lonesome Dove miniseries because me and her watched it lately. She also wants to know if the book is worth reading. She should join me for my read along. What was she? Did you mention she was born in 1991? She should join me for my read along. It'll keep her out of trouble. She's a teenager. It'll keep her out of trouble. But oh my, the miniseries. I remember watching that and thinking, okay, where is this going? What is this? I mean, Duvall is effortlessly charismatic. Tommy Lee Jones is effortlessly charismatic. The two of them do seem to be doing something together with this role, which is kind of hard to get, big, willful lead actors to do. It's clear that they're working off each other. They've obviously had lots of conversations before the first day of filming about who these characters are in connection with each other. That comes off right away, but I was thinking, all right, well, that's great, but is that going to carry a whole miniseries? I mean, what is there any chance that this miniseries will capture anything of the magic of the book, much less have a magic of its own? And then we get the scene where they steal their cattle from a Mexican cattle baron who turns out to have died in his sleep, so he doesn't miss it. The scene where they're rustling that cattle and the music swells and Gus McCrae doffs his hat to the stunned vaqueros who are just watching their remuda be stolen across the border. The music swells. Uh, Robert Duvall is clearly having the time of his life, smiling his head off. His McCrae waits for a minute to salute the men they're robbing, and I was amazed. That scene, I was blown away. I thought, okay, well, the scene is exciting in the book, but it's nothing like that. Nothing at all. And then I remember thinking, okay, well, so you can capture the magic of an exciting scene from the book. Okay, fine, that's great. That will make me watch the whole of this miniseries. But can you maybe create any magic of your own? And then 2 scenes later, I don't know how many of you know the miniseries, but 2 scenes later, we get the scene where the wagon where they're all leaving, where they're leaving Lonesome Dove, where they're going on their ride, and the 2 pigs decide to follow them, and the music swells again. And that scene is nothing in the book, and it's pure magic in the miniseries. I was totally, totally caught up after that, just totally caught up. Well, that was all for Jasper's mom. Good lord. Anyway, I've missed a whole bunch of the chat because I was going nuts about the miniseries. Uh, haven't you done multiple Dune read-alongs? They were all great. Well, I think I did 2 at least read-alongs of Dune. So have I in fact pioneered the reread along without knowing it? Uh, let's see here. Leo Percara says, "Thank God you didn't apologize, or they would give you the Louis C.K. Eugenio Diaz treatment." I did apologize. If you're referring to my original sin on BookTube, what a YouTuber, not a BookTuber, but a YouTuber friend of mine says is the reason I don't have 100,000 subscribers. If you're referring to that original sin, I did apologize. The comment that it wasn't a video, it was a comment that I made in a comment section of a video, and the comment that I made was dumb, and I did apologize for that. I was, regardless of whether or not I thought I had any justification, I was judging whether or not someone was a genuine reader by visual appearance, which is totally wrong to do in all cases. Not that it mattered. None of the people that jumped on the original sin in order to jump up their own channels in order to get themselves 50,000 subscribers, none of them were paying attention to whether or not I clarified or apologized. I still maintain, though, that comment is what got fed up the food chain to a much bigger booktuber who tagged it with everyday sexism, y'all. That comment is what caused that to happen. But I still maintain that the thing that outraged people was not that comment. It was that in the video itself, I pointed out the rather obvious fact that some people on BookTube are fake readers that don't really read anything. They don't care about it at all. They're totally phony. I think that's what rubbed people the wrong way. Not so much the comment that I made, in small letters in the comments. Anyway, I didn't apologize for the fake reader comment because it's completely true. Uh, let's see here. Jeff Messerman says this could only lead to reread alongs on YouTube. Don't attempt this. The universe will implode. I don't know. Some reread, as long as the person who conducts the reread along is learning. I don't want them going through, a rote set of points that are the only things I've ever thought about book X, Y, or Z. But if they're reading it afresh, as I would hope that I would be for Lonesome Dove, I can't wait to see it through Matthew's eyes. Um, but anyway, books, songs, and other magic says I find it a frustrating juggling act with rereads and new books that I haven't read. I reread Alice in Wonderland on the weekend, which was awesome, obviously. Yeah, I can understand that, and my heart goes out. I don't have that problem myself. I have a lot more reading time than most people do. But so looking at the balancing act that people do, I watch like my fellow booktubers. They're swamped in other things to do, work, life, and yet the head has to hit the pillow at 10:15. It just amazes me. I don't know where anybody finds the time, except it can be done. If Mark Richards can find time to read, any of you can find time to read, and he does. Uh, let's see here. Jesse says I need to read Lonesome Dove. I have it on my bookshelf. I will be there for the read along. You're going to love it. Shauna McKelly says, Steve, you often say that there is no right or wrong way to read, so you should have the freedom to engage in as many read alongs as you want. I'm here for Catcher in the Rye if you discuss it. Wouldn't a read along of Catcher in the Rye be fun? An adults only read along of Catcher in the Rye, where the adults only part refers to how we read it, not the age of the participants. That would be a lot of fun. IDIC Warrior Reed says, hello, y'all. Jasper says, speaking of rereading, what books do you guys think you have read the most amount of times? I think for me, it is definitely the Iliad. Uh, well, you're asking them, not me, when I'm the star. Lou G says, I'm thinking I should go ahead and order Lonesome Dove so as to be prepared for the reread along. Well, you should definitely read it. If by order you mean you haven't read it, you should definitely read it. It is a truly great novel. And I think rather obviously, I mean, Michael K. Vaughan might disagree on a point of order here or there, but I think rather obviously the greatest Western that's ever been written. Uh, let's see here. Geo Craftsman says I could be finding time to read right now, but here I am instead. Yes, I know. I'm enabling you all. And the worst part of it is that one by one you will all drop off to sleep, uh, and I will still be going strong. I do not intend to sleep tonight. Uh, let's see here. Perfect Hand Production says, in recent years, I've been working to read more books as I've spent years regretting not developing that habit. Unfortunately, one of the first novels I selected was Blood Meridian. Well, at least it can only go up from here. Perfect Hand Productions actually put me off reading for a few months, thinking I just wasn't capable of understanding the prose. Now, having finished your The Road series a few days ago, I feel much better. Yes, it's not that you don't understand the prose, it's that you're not willing to pay the price. The price you have to pay to understand the prose of Blood Meridian is to intentionally fall down a flight of stairs and hope that you sustain serious brain trauma. Once that happens, it'll seem like, holy writ. You don't want to do that, though. That's not a good trade off. Uh, Beatrice Mendes says, I'm all for a read along with The Catcher in the Rye. I think so. I think so. And it should be in September. It should be a back to school read along. Maybe we ought to revisit all of the staples of high school reading lists. That might be a lot of fun to do. Uh, Oh no, Jasper, we don't need weekly. Jasper says we need weekly read-alongs. You people have enough of me droning in your ears as it is. Although some staples of my channel are up for grabs here. The turmoil that the library tour is under in my heart right now is just awful. Uh, let's see here. Madman Gone Mad 2012 says, "What are your thoughts on E.M. Forster?" His novels, you mean? I like them. I like all of them. Let's see here. Uh, oh my God, the chat is more than I can. Is the number right? Am I reading the number right that there are 82 people here? Uh, oh my God, is that other number right that we've been doing this for an hour? Oh, that's got to come to an end. I still have a point to make. One of my original points that I wanted to make, and I've been distracted by all you great people and all your stories that I haven't done it. Uh, yes, revisiting high school books. I think. I think we should revisit a slate of one book a week of high school reading list classics for September when high school starts again. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Uh, Leo Percara says you should do some read along with the short stories of John O'Hara. They are so weird sometimes. Yeah, they are, aren't they? Brutal. The brutality comes out of nowhere sometimes. You don't realize that it was lurking under the surface the whole time. That is just amazing. Uh, uh, let's see here. Ravens fan 1961 says, Steve, hello. I would like to know your thoughts on William Faulkner. I think he's very hard to read. Yes, he is very hard to read because he's terrible. Uh, let's see here. Jack O'Hara says, no, 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 I just got here. Well, the video will still be up. And unlike a lot of other people who do live streams, I am reading the comments. I'm reading them out loud in case they're not transcribed in the video. There's nothing more annoying in a live stream that goes up as a video on somebody's channel than to watch them just silently reading comments off to the side. You have no idea what the comments are. Every once in a while, they decide to respond to one. Who needs that? Anyway, I ain't finna read that says, oh no, he's responding to somebody. Uh, let's see here. Uh, but his response is really good. The Blood Meridian is like heavy metal on full blast for 2 hours straight. You might like metal, but it's going to damage your hearing regardless. That's pretty good. Bambi says, I read Moby Dick because of you. Would like to say thank you. Oh, thank you. That's wonderful to hear. It has stuck with me ever since, and I would be up for a Steve read along anytime. It does stick with you, doesn't it? That's wonderful to hear. Uh, Jasper says, according to my screen, the stream only started streaming 80 seconds ago. We have plenty of time. I think your screen might be wrong. IDIC, that's infinite diversity and infinite combination, for those of you not familiar with your classic Star Trek, says, hello, Steve. Would really love for you to do a read along of Marilyn Robinson's books if possible. You got the wrong guy. I can get, let's see if I can get Sam Sachs of the Wall Street Journal to do a read along of Marilyn Robinson. She's a little bit too deep waters for yours truly. Uh, uh, let's see here. Jack O'Hara says, yes, but my comments won't be mentioned. Well, aren't you the little prima donna? Michael K. Vaughn says, I'm so glad not to be the only one who feels that way about Faulkner. Yes, I would say that he's dog crap, but I find dog crap to be infinitely interesting. uh, Jeff Messerman says, I'm so glad I don't have to read Faulkner anymore. God, he is terrible. It's so nice to hear it articulated. Shauna McHale, says, Steve, if we read high school classics in September, would you please explain As I Lay Dying? I had to read it 3 times in school and I hated it every time. Well, that's because it stinks. I don't know. I mean, high school classics, I would want to pluck the ones uh, that are good, not intentionally go after the ones that are bad. Especially, I would like to go after the ones that are good, but maybe better than people think who only read them at gunpoint and in high school. Like something like Catcher in the Rye, and we could even try All Quiet on the Western Front, and I'm sure that there would be Orwell has to be on there. Let's see here. Songs, Books, and Other Magic says, Steve, you missed my comment, but I mentioned 1984. What do you think of that book? It's a perfect example of what I'm talking about, where the book is much better. There's a lot more going on than you're going to remember from high school if that's when you were made to read it. Uh, uh, let's see here. Jack O'Hara says, because I didn't make any comments because Steve is a ninja streamer. Steve has to be a ninja streamer. He can't stream like ordinary people because it doesn't work. Although this new backstage setup with YouTube, maybe it will work now. Maybe I can make an announcement video and then make that video go live. Uh, Andy Curlybook says, I read the Scarlet Letter in high school and remember it was one of the few students who said they liked it. Well, Scarlet Letter would be a good one. I haven't done Nathaniel Hawthorne at all on this channel. He's one of my favorite American authors. Jasper Antonelli says, oh my God, I just had a great idea. Reading Clarissa by Richardson, but reading it in real time across 1 year. Yeah, well, it's an idea. I'm not sure it's a great one. Fedista says, how do you feel about Thomas Wolfe? Which of his do you think is best? Look Homeward, Angel is best. And it's really good. It raises all that and everything else that he wrote raises all sorts of questions about editing. But it's still undeniably powerful. Alexis Kiri says, I loved As I Lay Dying in high school. I thought it was the funniest book I ever read. Freeman Fritty says, "How was the latest John Gwynn, The Hunger of the Gods?" I really enjoyed it. I trembled a little in my enjoyment because Juan at Just Juan Reader bashed John Quinn. Said these things look awful. They look just terrible. He did the unpopular opinions tag and uncorked quite a bit of ire in the direction of John Quinn. It sort of shook my confidence. Uh, Jasper says the most annoying read along ever was what? Oh, right, the Clarissa would be the most annoying read along ever. All a lot of my read alongs qualify as annoying. Uh, Joel Swagman asks, "Is 1984 Dude Bro lit?" No, it's not. Dude Bro's unqualifiedly adopted, but it's not. It shares none of the seven sins of Dude Bro lit. It's just with the seminal video on my channel. Uh, let's see here. Madman God Mad 2012 says 1984 is overrated. Brave New World, which is always lampooned with it, is just a bad book. I agree. I agree. I don't know that that's a totally acceptable opinion in the broader world, but I agree. If we had to link the two of them together, I don't think there's any comparing the two. Uh, let's see here. IDIC Warrior reads, "What did you think of Strange New Worlds trailer?" That's a whole other conversation now, isn't it? I am not at liberty to disclose, except to say, believe it or not, Strange New Worlds has a booktube connection. And so, of course, for that reason and many other reasons, I want to love it. I want to love it. Uh, I don't know why I want to love it. I know the people who are producing this. A leopard does not change its spots. I know the people who are making this thing. So I know what it will be. There's absolutely no chance that it will be what fans are hoping it will be. All fans are hoping that it will be good, that it will be real Star Trek. Even the people who claim, because they don't want to get canceled, that they love Star Trek Discovery, STD, are still saying on social media that they hope this will be real Star Trek, implicitly implying that Star Trek Discovery is not real Star Trek, as of course it's not. Of course, I want to love it, but uh, everything that I've seen, almost everything that I've seen in the trailers, just confirms that it will be bad, that it will be more Kurtzman Trek, hectoring, lecturing, Twitter politics, identity politics, openly characterizing large chunks of the audience as bad people, openly doing that, and presenting us with uncriticizable characters, one-dimensional, uncriticizable characters. My worry now, I think that I will be right. I think that I will be right. Is that Captain Pike will end up being a kind of measuring rod of white cis male privilege cluelessness. And the whole of the first season will be a long process of him being brought up to speed on how clueless he is. That would be really, really bad, but I hope I'm wrong. But all the characterizations that I've seen, we don't know anything really about Dr. Mabenga, for instance, except that he studied on Vulcan. So that's great. That's great. Does all that you want about him. We know that it's non-canonical in a number of ways. We know how Christine Chapel joined Starfleet. She wasn't on the Enterprise when Kirk got there. We know that. We know how she joined Star Trek. It's in one of the episodes. And if anywhere in the first season of Strange New Worlds, Christine Chapel even mentions the name Roger Corby, then I'm the Shah of all the Russias. We don't know anything about Dr. Mabenga. That was a legitimately good choice. I'm okay with Uhura being a cadet on the vessel and staying on the Enterprise all this time, and so that she is so-called inherited by Kirk. But we also see Kirk in command. We see him in Command Gold. That is non-canonical for the time period. And there are a whole bunch of other things as well. We'll see. We'll see. I don't like the presumption already. The idea, the presumption underlying Kurtzman Trek is that Kurtzman Trek understands Star Trek better than any of the Nimrods who've come before. You might have loved the show, sure, brought it back to life and made it a billion-dollar property, but you didn't understand it the way we do. We have blue check marks on Twitter, so we understand it best. And that presumption shows itself in a lot of ways. And one of the ways is just telling fans new canonical things, like the promotional poster that just dropped a week ago, that presumed to tell us Mr. Spock's name. It's just it's just astonishing. The cheek, the sheer chutzpah is just astonishing. But anyway, oh my god, I'm completely lost. I went off on a Star Trek thing, and that will do it. But I haven't even got yet to the other point that I wanted to make about that booktube drama that started this whole live stream, this whole ninja live stream, the booktube drama involved Michael K. Nip referring to a Pew Research poll that showed that roughly 20% of the people who answered the poll don't read anything at all. And then uh, uh, Brian at Bookish responding to that video and also bringing up that poll. And I wanted to bring up that poll myself because it's really weird. It's really really weird, that poll. If you dig into the specifics of it, you wonder that it's used at all, that it's referenced at all. And I think, with all due respect, that both Michael and Brian missed the most important thing in the poll. First of all, the poll was done of 1,000 people in a country of 350 million. So that's a rounding error. That is essentially nothing. That's the same thing as you asking all the people at the bar on Friday night. It says as little about the broader country as that would. And second, for some mystifying reason, one of the specific stipulations of the poll is that 50% of the recipients had to be called on a landline, on a land telephone line. Nobody has a landline anymore. Why? If you're going to go out of your way to stipulate that as a guardrail of the whole thing, that is so bizarre. Like saying, well, we're going to call people from all different ages and all different ethnic groups, but 50% of the people that we call have to have 1980 Toyotas. That is such a weird, specific qualification that it makes me wonder what's going on there. Usually, when you see a parameter like that, money has changed hands. I don't know why. I don't know how it would be. It could be that Pew was underwritten by whoever still has any kind of interest in who has landlines in order to sell them that information, so they know who has them and who doesn't. But if that is going to be a guiding parameter of your survey, well, what kind of people are you going to get who have landlines, right? That tells you something about them before you've asked them a single question about what they read or how much they read. That tells you a lot about them. Anyway, so I have a lot of suspicion for the survey just in general. I don't think it's worthwhile to talk about. I don't think it's a worthwhile survey. It would have to be done on 100,000 times greater scale, and without the maniacal, weird, necrotic concentration on landlines. Who has landlines anymore? But in addition to that, I also wanted to, the other point that I wanted to make is that everybody's concentrating on Jimmy Kimmel and Michael K. Nip and Brian at Bookish, all concentrating on that percentage of people who report that they have not read or finished a book at all in the last year. With, again, the easy implication being that they don't read at all, obviously, right? Because if you read for pleasure, you're not going to take a year off. So people are concentrating on that, and they're comparing that with earlier Pew studies that show roughly the same thing, maybe a slight increase. And the part of the survey that they're missing, now keep in mind, I'm saying the survey is worthless. It's a rounding error. It doesn't say anything about the larger country. It's too small. But I could, in other words, the size of this survey is the size of the survey that I could have on my YouTube channel in 1 week. And I'm not the Pew institution. So I'm prefacing this by saying that this survey is kind of worthless. It's getting people talking. It's getting Jimmy Kimmel doing little comedy bits about how nobody reads anymore, but it's kind of worthless. But the part of the survey that I would think more people would pay attention to is that the number of people, you see, it doesn't do us any good to concentrate on the fact that there is a group of people out there in the world who don't read at all for pleasure. We already know this. We've known this our whole lives. it's there's a huge number of people out there in the world who don't read for pleasure. This survey reflects that. Any survey is going to reflect that. The important thing should be what's happening to the numbers of people who do read for pleasure. And this survey shows what the last two Pew surveys showed on the same subject, which is that that number is in free fall. That number is drastically lower every time this survey is done, even with landline users. The quadrant of it that we should be paying attention to is not the people who admit to a stranger on the phone that they don't read, but rather the people who admit they do read for pleasure, but they read a lot less for pleasure than they did before. Sorry, am I missing the chat here? Uh, uh, I find it amusing that Trek, the motion picture, is making the rounds because of 4K restoration. The Kurtzman crowd will all have their faces melted off in the bowels of each. Uh, uh, let's see here. Oh, Wilson Shugart wants to know, is this live? Wilson Shugart says, is this live? And Leo Kempter has the line of the night when he says, well, yes and no. Anyway, IDIC Warrior reads, the Star Trek troublemaker who got me off on a 15-minute tangent, says, people at work always look at me at lunch while I'm reading like I'm some extinct creature. Believe it or not, my Deb and I used to get that same reaction when we read in a bookstore at lunch. Jesse says, I'm so grateful for your channel. Oh, well, thank you. When I'm not feeling well or just have no motivation to watch your videos, I feel happy and get back to reading and writing. Well, that's one of the reasons why I've made a sort of a solemn vow to myself not to make videos on my channel when I myself am unhappy. Because you get enough of that, right? There's enough of that in your own life. There's also quite a few YouTubers and some booktubers who don't trouble to hide that they wish they could be doing something else. They're just feeding the algorithm for money. I don't want that ever to be me. I'm fairly naturally happy person, so when it's going to be rare when I feel like I want to make a video, I don't want to let people down. I know quite a few people out there whose kids ask them at school, even young kids in grade school, will ask their parents, "Is there a new Steve video up?" I don't want to let those people down. I always want to have something interesting and bookish to talk about, or just bookish if I can't manage to be interesting. But I know that, and I don't want to let people down. So I'm very cautious when I am feeling uh, like it just won't work. Like any kind of sad or bad preoccupation that I'm feeling will come through on camera. You people all know me. You people all know me really well. So you're going to be able to run down on the fingers of one hand the factors that will do that. If Frida is not feeling well, I'm not going to want to make videos, for instance. But anyway, let's see here. Matt Sheridan says, I don't like Star Trek. All right, well, I think you know the way to the transporter pad then, don't you? Captain Dunsel. Uh, let's see here. Book Songs of Magic says, if I thought about the people I know, my family, friends I work with, I know very few people personally who read for pleasure. That's partly why I enjoy BookTube so much. Yeah, a lot of people come to BookTube just for that. Just for that. J. Scott Phillips is shouting, Herbert, Herbert. I wonder how many of you will get that. Jasper Antonelli says, this channel definitely cheers me up too. I was having a horrible, rotten day because I saw that you were streaming. Cheered me up. Uh, Tobin Moffat says, Imitation of Christ, worth one's time. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, it is. Oh, my God. IDIC Warrior Reed says, our family always watch you. See, that's what I mean. I'm not meaning it to sound grandiose. I'm not patting myself on the back. I do plenty of that, but I'm not patting myself on the back. I have had emails like that on the subject for years. Kids saying to their parents, is there a new Steve video up yet? Parents whose own parents who are maybe in assisted living or maybe not quite, maybe they've lost a step or two, is that man, does that man have a new video? I love watching him. I used to love reading, that sort of thing. I've had too many of those kinds of comments over the years to discount them. So I take it seriously. Which is why I don't like to do it when I'm not feeling. Oh God, I'm missing the chat here. Crackhead says, thoughts on Nabokov. Find people tend to miss the humor. Oh, there's your comment. It's gone. Let's see here. Andy Curly Book says your Dude Bro videos make me very happy. I'm well overdue for a Bro Watch video. Well overdue. It's been a long time since I did that. I need to find a new victim and do it. Uh, Sean McKelly says, Steve, I think you missed my previous comment. I was wondering if you are still planning a read along of Remembrance of Things Past. Did I miss it? You didn't miss it. No, it hasn't happened yet. Gina, stand your books. Oh my God, here comes trouble. Says, hi, Steve. Hail, Perfect Hand Production says, uh, Matt Show. Okay, Matt Sheridan said earlier, I don't like Star Trek. This is not good. Of course, this is very bad. It's a mystery, and I don't like mysteries. They give me a bellyache, and I've got a beauty right now. But in response, Perfect Hand Production says, "Shaka when the walls fell." People. And I don't know how many of you will get that, but that is the perfect response when someone says, "I don't like Star Trek." Shaka when the walls fell. The beast of Tanagra. Anyway, uh, let's see here. Uh, Beatrice Bende says Debbie didn't show up today. Who's Debbie? Oh, Deb, my Deb. Well, no. In case I didn't mention it, Deb is the opposite of me in every way. Okay, so she is the laziest person in the world. It's hard enough to get her to talk to me, much less to make any kind of a video. Plus, I think she's up in Maine and has no access to any kind of technology. They still start fires with sticks and stones up in Maine. Uh, let's see here. Matt Sheridan says, "Does anyone like J.J. Abrams' Star Trek films?" I like bits and pieces of them. Bits and pieces of them are so well done. That sequence when Kirk and Khan are jetpacking their way through a debris field and racing towards a door on the other ship that won't open. It's supposed Scotty's got to open it for them. They think they're going to splat against the hull. That's a great sequence, absolutely fantastic. But it's only sequences. The rest of it is so mind-numbingly dull. Uh, let's see here. Madman Gone Mad 2012 says, "What's your favorite E.M. Foster novel?" Probably Where Angels Fear to Tread. Be my favorite. A little bit off. It's tough to compete with Howard's End, but probably that. Uh, Crackheads. Oh, has repeated the question. Okay, thoughts on Nabokov? I don't typically like him. I find people tend to miss the wit and humor of his works, especially Lolita, and the excessive focus on goes on the pornographic aspect. That Russian was funny. Well, I agree with you that the emphasis on Lolita gets everything wrong. I just even with when you adjust the emphasis and start looking at things in proper proportion, he's still never done it much for me. Alan Colley says, "Hi, Steve. The lunchtime shift has just started in Australia. Oh, gigantic, sun kissed country that I will never see. The one place on earth I've never seen. The one place on earth I've never been. And bad enough that I've never been there, but it has a kind of dog all on its own. It has a kind of dog on all on its own that I will never face smooch with. That is just heartbreaking. Heartbreaking. Uh, let's see here. I saw something about Princess Margaret. I also saw something about Horace, but it's gone. I'm not going to touch the chat because that ruined it last time. Matt Sheridan says, "Okay, thoughts on Star Wars? Anyone, anyone at all?" I thought you were told to leave 10 forward, bub. The proper response to your question about thoughts on Star Wars is that you should take the weekend, the whole week, if you have to like Star Trek. El Castillo says, "Anyone, are you wearing pants?" No. What is this, church? Let's see here. Perfect Hand Productions says, "Last question because I've commented too much already. Any thoughts on the Horatio Hornblower novels? I was thinking about checking them out. They're wonderful." You're asking me if I like Horatio Hornblower? They're wonderful. They're not as good as Patrick O'Brien. That's my own opinion, but they're wonderful. Uh, Joel Swagman says, "Follow up on Nabokov. What about Pale Fire?" I need to revisit this author. I know that he has lots of high quality, intelligent appreciators. I have never liked. I've been reading him my whole life. I've never liked him, including Pale Fire. The closest I come to liking him are his notes on Eugene Onegin, which is not much. So it's way down the list of people, the things that people like by this author. Uh, uh, let's see here. Greg X says the moving of Proust from one month to the other has a "We have always been at war" in East Asia call. uh, Books, songs, and other magic says it's 3 a.m., so he's got to go. So finally, we're getting rid of him. Matt Sheridan says Khan was really confusing in Into Darkness. Oh, so now you have opinions on Star Trek. That's great. You don't like it, but you have plenty of opinions. That's lovely. Jasper Antonelli says this is a comment meant to scare and anger Steve. One of the most well-written books I've ever read was Calculus by Michael Spivak. It only it only scares me because I'm afraid for you. That's all. J. Scott Phillips says, "How about the Richard Bolitho novels? Decidedly third rate. If you've got a sweet tooth for Napoleon era seafaring adventure, definitely read them. But Hornblower and Patrick O'Brien blow them out of the water, no pun intended." Matt Sheridan says, "Steve, were you ever a fan of Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack?" No, no, I wasn't. I was a big fan of Star Trek, though. Oh god, the chat is outside. Leah Kempter says, "Jasper, I love calculus." Oh god. Jeff Messerman says, "My Korg can eat your Wookiee, Matt." God, I've got the nerds at war with each other. uh, let's see here. Joe Law 13 says, "I just finished From a Taller Tower." Oh my. Uh, oh my, what a book. I'm glad you liked it. I take my recommendations very, very seriously, but some of them you can see from this book or from the Anders Breivik book that I talked about today on one of my videos. Some recommendations you make a lot more gingerly than others, right? But a really good book. There are, of course, can be really good books on horrible subjects. As I know, I've been touting nonstop a long historical novel about Benito Mussolini. Uh, let's see here. Crackhead says it's 2212 here in Chile. Beautiful, beautiful Chile. Oh my. People all from places I'm never going to see again. Or in the case of Australia, never going to see at all. Uh, let's see here. Aaron Anderson says thoughts on James Elroy. He's brilliant. He's brilliant. He's a new language. He's a new vocabulary. He won't be immediately brilliant in an ordinary way. He's not conventionally brilliant, but he is brilliant. Let's see here. Suicide Toad says, "Is Frederick Forsyth worth the read?" Start with his very best book. Start with Day of the Jackal. If you like that book, then maybe you could read some of his other stuff. But if you don't, if it seems shop worn or wooden to you, then all the rest of it is going to be much more so. Taylor Brock says, "Hey, Steve, just came in. I didn't get a notification." Well, how do I know how to send notifications? I have no idea. This is a ninja stream. If I could learn how to do notifications, then I would. But have the guys in white with a van been through your neighborhood lately? What does that mean? Guys in white with a van? What does that mean? Leo Kempter says, "Have you read the trilogy by Jane Gardam?" You have just asked a "Have you read?" question. We got through this whole ninja stream without anyone asking a "Have you read?" question until now. Madman Gone Mad 2012. This has been a very lengthy ninja stream. We're all blessed. Condolences to others who missed out. This lengthy ninja stream has to end. Now that I finally made my final point, which is that the part of that Pew Research poll that people should be concentrating on, aside from the weird concentration on landlines, is that the number of people who read for pleasure is going down. It doesn't matter that the number of people who admit they don't read at all stays about the same. That's not the number we should be paying attention to, regardless of what the cause is, whether it's bad teaching in high school or not. The number that we should be paying attention to is going steadily down, and it has been for the whole of half a century. Uh, anyway, Jasper Antonelli says, "If I ever get my hands on Steve, I will talk to him about math until he kicks me out." You are welcome here, or for wine and calzones at any time. If I can take 5 days of David Murphy, I can take a weekend of you. Jack O'Hara says, "I watched the first episode because of you, Steve. William Shatner wasn't even in it. I was seriously confused." First episode of what? Uh, first episode of what? Um, well, anyway, Bookmarks and Bookshelf says, "What is the best book you've read this month?" I have high hopes for the rest of the month. Can I put it that way? This has not been a good year so far. Um, let's see here. I don't know how to say your name. What are your thoughts on? Oh no, you're gone. K Fu says, "I think a more useful survey would be how to find out how many books tubers read books they've claimed to. I've seen several who'd lifted written reviews and oh, these chat's going too fast. Well, the general point was that a lot of booktubers who tout books don't read them and look at the success model. You can see right away why that would work. They copy each other and they think, well, okay, Jack Edwards clearly does not read, and yet he has two extremely successful channels. He's independently wealthy. and has thousands and thousands of acolytes who think he's their reading guru, the best read guy in the world, purely because he's cute, purely because of that. Talk about reading reviews. God, let's see. Matt Sheridan says we're reading Moby Dick in class right now. You know, like Moby Dick, that would be Captain Picard of Star Trek. Freeman Fritty says thoughts on Percival Everett. He's great. You now know this because the entire critical community, all of my critical brethren, say that he's great. When did they start saying that? Would be the question. And who maybe told them this guy's great? You should pay attention to him. uh, let's see here. Jasper Antonelli says, "Oh yeah, Star Trek's first episode doesn't even have Shatner in it." Uh, let's not be pedantic, right? The first episode of Star Trek is Man Trap, and it does have Shatner in it, and he does a great job. If you're talking about the menagerie, anyway, the first episode of Star Trek has Shatner in it. It's the Man Trap. Let's see here. Matt Sheridan says thoughts on the Superman TV show with George Reeves. Are you joking? I love it. I've quoted from it 1,000 times on my channel. I love it. To distraction. Jack O'Hara, yes, the original series of Star Trek. Well, again, the original series of Star Trek, the first episode did have William Shatner in it. If you're talking about the original movie, the pilot movie that Gene Roddenberry made and then cut up into Court Martial, into the Menagerie Part 1 and Part 2. Okay, fine. But that wasn't the first episode that aired. It's there. I watched the first episode that aired. It had Shatner in it. Let's see here. Hi, Jayara says, do you like any of Lemony Snicket's books? I really enjoy rereading a series of unfortunate events again after my initial read as a kid. So many references, even Edward Gibbon. I agree. They're wonderful. What are your thoughts on William James and Henry James? I like them both. William considerably more than Henry. Joe Law 13 says, I also finished reading Sasquatch Legend Meets Science and now totally believe the legend. Curiously believe in the North American ape as well. If anything, they're the same thing. I know perfectly, I know perfectly well the odds against there being anything. We're talking breeding populations. We're talking all that they would do to change the landscape, to leave stuff behind. We're talking the number of people who track over every inch of that backcountry and have cameras with them the whole time. But oh my God, look at all these quads. We have to go. This thing's almost 2 hours long. We have to close this up. I just wanted to talk about BookTube drama. Oh God, I can't even carry all these things. Scott Amon's. Oh God, no, I missed it. I missed it completely. Uh, Huge Insomniac says you were there, but you're 28. Past life regression. Jesse says I've been giving younger relatives books as gifts. Proud to say they've started reading more. They also like to share with me, which is going on in the stories. I guarantee you, it's the sharing with you and not the giving of gifts that makes them do it more. Jasper Antonelli says something lately in the Peviar and Volkonsky translation have a great thing at the beginning listing all the nicknames of the characters. Is that referring to War and Peace? I must have missed that. You people are talking amongst each other now. Jeff Messerman, August Derleth's Sauk Prairie books worthwhile? No. J. Scott Phillips, Steve is 28, but also a time traveler. Yes, well, I don't do myself any favors. I say that I'm a raven-haired 28-year-old, but I'm constantly referencing things that happened 60 years ago. That, and also at the end of every year, I disappear, which has led all the dedicated Whovians who watch my channel to automatically call that regeneration, which is about as good an explanation as I can come up with. So I don't know. It's harder and harder for me to deny the whole time travel bit. Yes, let's see here. Suicide Toad, thanks for talking with us, Steve. Well, I do have to go. I didn't think this was going to work at all, and it was so much fun. Good Lord, I could do this every day. Let's see here. Sir Reads a Lot says, have you read The Magic Shadow, the sequel to Shantaram Thoughts? No, I have not. No, I have not. That's a have you read question, but you get a pass because the answer is no. Let's see here. Crackhead says, thoughts on Ezra Pound? I think his essays and criticism are vastly more enjoyable. He makes me feel ignorant in a good way. I would agree, although given the pop culture tone of this ninja stream, I'd rather talk about Ezra Miller. Jasper Antonelli says Steve is 28 but was born in 1776. I don't have the right to question how. I wasn't born in 1776. If I was born in 1776, I wouldn't have been hating George Washington guts in 1776. Uh, let's see here. Uh, Reading something lately says thank you. Oh, okay. You addressed to somebody else. You're not talking to the star of the show. Uh, Hi, JR says thank you and good night. Frida, I mean Steve and Frida, sending love. Do booze from my birds. Matt Sheridan says Steve simply does not age. Thank you for the awesome live chat. What is the best Soseki novel? Well, it sure is not I Am a Cat, right? We know that. Does the Gorman Guest trilogy get better after Titus Grown or worse? It's all great. It's all great. You just have to get into its rhythm. It's not gonna reach you at all. It's not gonna meet you even halfway. You have to totally surrender to it. Uh, J. Scott Phillips says, "When will the calzones be ready? You're all welcome here. This is the closest we're ever going to get, but you're all welcome here." Uh, like I said, if I can survive 5 days of David Murphy, I can survive. Oh wait, we've got a Aaron Anderson. Can I do this without bumping myself out of the Ezra Miller? There's a narcissist. Well, we don't know what Ezra Miller is. Fascinating subject. And have you ever seen so much damage being done to a studio's entire slate of releases by one person? Just catastrophic damage by one person. Uh, Ain't finna read that says you're not allowed to hate George Washington. Canceled. I've hated George Washington from the beginning. From the beginning, long before 1776, long before. All of the things you read about him are lies. All of them are, and they've worked. They've worked all this time. That it was only reluctantly that he was called to be in command of the Continental Army when it assembled on Cambridge Common, 20 minutes away from here. That he only reluctantly did that. Well, if he was so reluctant, why did he show up at the Continental Congress in military uniform? Anyway, uh, Matt Sheridan, will Caro finish his last LBJ book? No. Jasper John Antonelli says, Steve, when will you go where all readers are? 4chan lit. I have been to 4chan lit many times. I'm waiting for them to notice me. I'm waiting for them to try and take me on. Some little punk there to try and take me on. The thing that the advantage I have is that people see me. They look at me and they think, this is a clueless old guy. I can take this guy on easily. And that's a dangerous thing for people to think. That's ageism, isn't it? Taylor Brock says, "What do you think of Cary Grant, The Making of a Hollywood Legend by Mark Delancey? Better than Scott Amon's book. Scott Amon's book is better, but they're both good." Um, let's see here. Jeff Masterman says, "This was a lovely way to spend a rainy Tuesday night. Thank you, Steve. Smooch Frieda for me." Uh, let's see here. J. Scott Phillips, then who chopped down that cherry tree? If it was George Washington, he made one of his slaves do it and beat him when he didn't do it fast enough. Founding father of the country. No wonder the country's so screwed up. Uh, uh, let's see. I know. Z Maxwell says long before 1776. You're really not helping your I don't time travel case here. I got the reports. I read the reports as well as anybody did in the newspapers about how this guy was bungling things up on the Western frontier and single-handedly causing a war between Great Britain and France. Let's see here. Uh, uh, Ain't finna read that says I speak for all lit citizens when I say Steve is not welcome on 4chan. I think he knows that. Just as long as they know not to try and take me on. I might look like a crapulous old guy, but I can think circles around anyone I've ever seen on that chat board. Uh, let's see here. El Castillo says, "Will Johnny Depp win his case?" I think certainly. Uh, let's see here. Matt Sheridan says, "I may not like Star Trek, but I love these streams." Yeah, but that's only 1 out of 2, and 1 out of 2 is a failing grade. You need to like Star Trek. I'll be right over. Aaron Anderson says, "Neil Stevenson, canon material or eternal classic?" Uh, I don't like him nearly as much as his fans do. I can at least say that. David Peacock says, "Will the unpublished Salinger novels ever get published?" Ask yourself that question. The Salinger family is not hurting for money, but they could always use 10 million more. And it's been 25, 30 years since we were told that house in New Hampshire was crammed full of manuscripts. Where are they? They obviously don't exist. Uh, Gone Mad, Madman Gone Mad 2012. Steve has a great memory. He always has Apt response to everything. Now I'm starting to doubt this is a live stream. I know. Well, okay. I have a fully active brain. And I, unlike the rest of you, have 15 more hours in my day. So again, be sure to warn those punks on 4chan that I'm not just some clueless old guy. I look that way, and that has caused many a person to regret taking me on. Of course, if the 4chan lit dudes want help, I'm perfectly happy to help them. Uh, but anyway, Sir Reesalot says, "What did you think of the BBS documentary on Benjamin Franklin?" It was okay. I, it wouldn't. Did it make you interested in Franklin? Did it make me interested in Franklin? As all documentaries should. I uh, let's see here. Ravens fan 1961. Steve, wasn't Thomas Jefferson worse? No, no. Well, he was odious in the same way that Washington was. In fact, he was worse than Washington in one regard, which is that he was, in addition to slave owner, he was a slave rapist. But personally, in conversation, day to day, over coffee, over chocolate, he was much more enjoyable. Washington was just so incredibly full of himself. And well, okay, Washington had smallpox, so he couldn't have children. But I don't think that exonerates him from trying in the slave quarters, if you know what I mean. History doesn't even look in that direction, but I don't think that exonerates him at all from trying. It was sort of a pastime with people who were monster enough to want to own other people. uh, Lee Rudder says, "I'm in New York for a job for a few weeks and haven't spent much time here outside of shorter trips. Do you have any must-do New York recommendations?" The Strand. Go to the Strand bookstore. Go to Housing Works bookstore. Uh, both of those are worth a visit. Absolutely. The American Museum of Natural History. A lot, a whole day, and give it the whole day. Wander around like you were an 8-year-old. Fill your mind with wonder. Definitely visit the New York Public Library. Uh, let's see here. Jasper Antonelli says, "Steve, how do you sleep so little?" It's not a, it's not an achievement. It's just the way I'm wired. It's always been that way. Wreak bloody havoc for my parents until they figured out the solution. The solution is just park him with a room full of dogs. He's not in any danger from them. They're not going to roll over on him or bite him or hurt him in any way. And then we don't have to worry because he can't be bothered. No one's going to approach them. They'll defend him. So let's just leave him if we need to sleep. Oh, I'm losing the chat though. Uh, Joe's Pizza on Carmine Street. Oh my God. Let's see here. Jesse says, "After my reread of Moby Dick, I want to read Trollope. I'm not sure where to start. Start with Barchester Towers, and don't be fooled. Don't be worried that it's technically the second in a series. Just start with Barchester Towers. It will hook you completely." Uh, Jasper Antonelli says, "I love the lid board, even though it is so toxic. They're so lovable." I agree. I agree. They don't know about me, but I know about them. I watch them in great detail. They are lovable in a toxic kind of way. It's just sometimes the only reason that I get such topspin when I talk about them is because sometimes they seem like they're spoiling for a fight, and I know that they think of old people dismissively, and I know that to some misguided eyes, I look old. uh, Matt Sheridan says, "Didn't Ken Burns offer up an apologetic for Robert E. Lee?" Well, you got Shelby Foote as the star talking head of your show. I have been saying for the longest time that long before it was fashionable to do, long before there was any kind of statues being pulled down, I've been saying for the longest time that Lee should have been hung from the tallest branch of the tallest tree. Uh, they should have been hanged by a rope until dead as soon as he signed the Appomattox Accords. So any favorable treatment of him rubs me the wrong way. In a way, far worse than Washington, because he was, up until Donald Trump, the worst traitor the United States had ever seen. In fact, maybe even worse than Trump, since he led men in battle. He actually spilled blood. Uh, let's see here. Nick Piccarilli says, "I thought the Ben Franklin documentary was subpar by Ken Burns Sanders." I agree. I agree. It left you bored. It didn't tell you anything you didn't already know or couldn't already learn from a book, and there was no passion in it at all. And it could have been done better. Uh, let's see here. Oscar Mendoza says, "I discovered this channel because someone mentioned it on the Reddit lit subreddit." Oh my. I don't want to know the context in which they Abe finna read that says, "Yeah, beyond the cringe racism and violent sexism, this is lots of fun." You have to read it with filters on for that kind of crap. And in a way, that actually makes me feel more protective of it, even though it's loathsome, the things I read there, because we are that is endangered. That kind of expression doesn't happen anymore. Uh, let's see here. El Castillo says, "What author has a good ear for writing genuine dialogue?" We mentioned James Elroy. James Elroy already came up here. I would mention him. Also, Elmore Leonard. Hardly anybody is good. Uh, Jack O'Hara says, "Is Scott?" Oh, I lost you. Aaron Anderson says, "Tell us more about your travels in time at sea, please." Well, I'm not going to tell you that in this live stream. This ninja stream is about to end. I'm going to cut it off at the 2 hour mark, which is an hour longer than I thought I'd go. Let's see here. Let's see here. Matt Sheridan says Shelby Foote was an odious figure in how he defended the Confederacy. Wow. Oh, aren't I the one who's supposed to be using the overtop language here? I don't know about odious. Well, his defense of the Confederacy was odious. Yeah, his obvious sympathy for them, it drives me crazy, and that existed in far greater amounts in American historiography. In the previous century, you couldn't read a book on the Confederacy without it being dripping in lost cause, knights gallant chivalry. Every time I read a book like that, I always wanted, sometimes did write in the margins, how did they support their economy? By owning other people. That's how they did it. Anyway, uh, let's see. That corner of the internet is intriguing because everybody talks in complete sentences and contributes to a conversation. Trade off is a good chunk of them are open white supremacists. That is where we find ourselves. That's the exact crossroads where we find ourselves. It's horrifying. It's horrifying. They don't walk in lockstep. That makes them incredibly refreshing compared to something like Twitter, but they are loathsome. uh, uh, let's see here. Matt Sheridan says Shelby Foote really, really liked to hear his own voice, didn't he? Well, I'm hardly in a position to criticize that now, am I? Uh, uh, yes, and Jasper Antonelli points out that he did have a good voice to listen to it. Uh, let's see here. Ain't finna read that says I agree. PC sanitized discourse ain't it. Does that mean it's not good? I think that means it's not good, right? Alexis Kiri says, "When is your next live stream? Will you make it a weekly event?" How do I know when it is? I still don't know how to do these things. Uh, uh, let's see here. Connor asks, "Are Shelby Foote's histories worth reading?" Yes, his 3 volume history is worth reading. I thought about all of you, especially those of you who live in book deserts where there are no places to get books, because just recently at the Brattle, there all 3 volumes were right there for I think $3 a piece, so $10 for the whole trilogy, and I already have it in a box set. I didn't need it myself, but I kept thinking, wouldn't it be? Isn't it? There are people who watch you every day who would want you to get this and boxed up and send it to them, and I didn't know anybody off the top of my head who did that, so I just left them. I'm sure they're gone by now. Uh, let's see here. Andy Curly Book says that's why I couldn't stand Gone with the Wind. Sympathetic slave ownership is just not for me. What can I say? Yeah, I might defend the storytelling power of Gone with the Wind, but oh my God, talk about Southern sympathy. Jeez, it's just very tough to get through. Uh, let's see here. Sir Reads a lot says I agree with the assessment of Lee. Grant's inferiority complex let Lee off the hook at Appomattox. He should have been arrested, horsewhipped, and hanged in front of his troops. And if once that's done and his body has finished twitching, hanging from a tree right outside Appomattox Courthouse, if his men don't like that, I'm perfectly okay with opening fire on them. I'm perfectly okay with that. I have said from the beginning that the slaves should have been freed and given ownership of the land they worked, and that every white slave owner in the South should have been put to the sword. Otherwise, you're just breeding a generation. And little did I know that we were breeding a whole subculture. All the Confederate flags at the insurrection that stormed the capital of my country. I just uh, let's see here. Let's see here. Madman Gone Mad 2012 says, Steve, is it true you abhor Kurt Vonnegut's works? Oh, it's worse than that. I hate his works. I also hated the man. Uh, Jasper Antonelli says more lit people should watch you, especially because 4chan lit is the exact demographic you always talk about wanting to reach. They should. They absolutely should watch me. I don't say that in self grandiosity. They should watch me because I don't varnish my opinions. I mean what I say. I know what I'm talking about. And like you say, I do care about their demographic. I genuinely do. The only reason that they go on to 4chan and are so toxic is because they don't know of any better way. They're all self-conscious. They're all easily embarrassable. They What they've got is a secret or not so secret admiration of Jordan Peterson, a flirtation with the alt-right, and the freedom of an unmoderated board on 4chan. Well, they could have us, right? They could have our corner of booktube. But any of that adolescent crap that's so time wasting, they're going to have to renounce anyway. If they want to be normal people in adult life, they're going to have to renounce it anyway. All they're doing is wasting time. When you know the passion's there, why not come and find our little corner of booktube? But I missed a lot on the chat. But we only have a minute left. Uh, uh, let's see here. Breakfast of Champions was so inventive to me when I first read it. Then I read Peenin, endearingly quirky, but IDK. What did you think of it? You're talking about garbage. Read Trollope instead. Follow up on Vonnegut, says Aaron Anderson. What do you think of the assertion that Harrison Bergeron is ironic and a parody of Heinlein-esque interpretation of socialism? Any interpretations that intuit depth to Vonnegut are wrong. He was dumb and he wrote dumb books. uh, let's see here. Jack O'Hara says, do you think Hollywood is an important subject, Steve? People always scoff at me when I say it's important. Not just gossipy fake crap. It's incredibly important. The people who scoff at you when you say that it's important were almost entirely formed by it. So that, of course it's important. Connor, what is your stance on Mount Rushmore? Should the biggest monuments that honor vicious slave owners be taken down? I don't agree with imposing present day moralism on monuments. Jefferson and Washington were immensely important figures in American history. Can't take that away. The thing I object to about Mount Rushmore is that it's a monument to white people in the most sacred ground of a people the white people ground down and conquered. That's why I'd want it detonated. That's why I didn't want it built in the first place, because it's not just that you're honoring slave owners; it's that it's a slap in the face of the most fundamental kind. Uh, it's like if you walked into the middle of St. Peter's and built a mosque. It just, uh, but anyway, let's see here. Colin Rafferty says, "I would love to hear your thoughts on Ben Shapiro." He seems pretty cute. He's a cute little kid. Talk about somebody who needed Steve at the right time and doesn't have it anymore. But he's anyway. Matt Sheridan says it drives me nuts how Dr. Mudd's family defends his name to this day. It's so gross. Uh, that's a random Civil War opinion on your part. Quentin F is laughing hilariously to something, but I don't know what. I assume it's me. Uh, Sir Reitzelot says, I will be stunned if Trump is ever held accountable. He will most likely die in bed like Stalin. He will. He won't be held accountable, especially not after 2024. Matt Sheridan says, which is the best Trollope novel to start with? Start with Barchester Towers. Totally winning, totally assured, funny, very funny. It'll prepare you for the best that Trollope is. That Trollope is great as a companion on the page. That's the charm of him, is that he's a companion on the page. You get that loud and clear in Barchester Towers, and they'll prepare you. Sometimes he's a grim companion. Sometimes it's not all fun and games. Uh, let's see here. Jasper Antonelli again. Matt Sheridan, I think he said Barchester Towers. I did. Freeman Fritty says Steve has to go read. It is the will of Landru. We've got some real Star Trek nerds in this ninja stream. uh, uh, let's see here. I ain't finna read that. Says destroying sculptures, monuments, historical artifacts is always a loss. They need to be preserved in all their beauty and ugliness. I agree completely. Don't agree with this pulling down of statues at all. I I don't agree with that at all. I don't mean to echo Donald Trump. I just think it's short-sighted to do. It doesn't mean you're not honoring the person. You're commemorating an important their role in society. It doesn't have to be all good. It can be what the odious yuppies refer to as a teaching moment. Uh, let's see here. Jack O'Hara says Shapiro still needs you, but I don't think he will listen. Well, if he won't listen to David Wolpe, he's not going to listen to me. Uh, yes, okay. Matt Sheridan says, "Gotta go. Good night," and I agree. We are all going to go. I have to cut this thing short. I'm very happy to notice that I still have a big red end stream button. So I'm going to end this stream. I know that seems totally heretical because we're having so much fun, but I'm going to end this stream. I'm glad that it worked. Got up to 100 people. I'm glad that it worked. But I'm going to end this stream with a Samuel Pepsian style and so to bed. Although I am not going to bed. But the rest of you are. The rest of you have to go to bed and get your beauty sleep for tomorrow. We will do this again. Somebody brought this up on to me in an email days ago. Said it's been a long time since you did a live stream. I noticed the person who brought that up is not here, but Uh, Nevertheless, we're all saying goodbye. We're going to say goodnight. This was a ton of fun. And we settled that when it comes to interpreting Pew results, only Steve, not anybody else, only Steve. So there we go. And scene. So I'm going to wrap up this stream. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you for all of the fun comments. And of course, Matt Sheridan has his path cleared for the rest of the week. He must be a Star Trek fan by the next time we have a Ninja stream. That shouldn't be hard. Anyway, I'm going to yes, and stream. Yes, and scene and stream. So I'm going to wrap this up at the 2 hour mark. Uh, but I'll be back. Count on it. So I will see you then. And thank you, Book Two.